So, a coworker of mine told me that he uses Microsoft Copilot frequently. In fact, he said, I don't know how to do my job without it. I mean, that came to me as a surprise. I can't stand Copilot. But this was a very productive employee, one of those 10x engineers you can throw any problem at and he'll just find a solution. I mean, obviously, if he found a use for Copilot, maybe I was just holding it wrong, you see? So that's why I decided to give it a shot. I decided, to put all my prejudice aside and just embrace this tool. They say AI is the future, so it shouldn't be too hard to find a way to integrate it into my everyday workflow. So I decided first to give it a week, meaning I wouldn't complain. Even when I didn't get the result I wanted, I would just keep going at it. So instead, for every frustration, I would use Copilot to help me that frown into a smile, so to say. So what was the result? Well, I created a workflow. I automated a lot of the things I find super annoying at work. Things like, the Scrum ceremonies, BRD reviews, email writing. I just hate those things so much. All the things I feel I must do only for someone else to tick a box in their own workflow. Those were automated now. After the first week, I decided to extend my trial for a full sprint. By embracing this tool, I felt like I had eliminated my manager's job. Instead of having him check boxes on his end, I could just present my reports at the end of the week and be done with it. By the way, I'm a software engineer, so you get where this is going. So I created a template prompt where I would dump information throughout the day, and at the end of the day, it would generate a report in whatever format I wanted. It was super amazing. I was so proud of my template that I decided to share it with my 10x coworker. He didn't respond with the enthusiasm I was expecting, He didn't understand what I was trying to do. I mean, it was obvious to me, but not to him. In fact, he told me he had never used Copilot before. That came to a shock to me, It was in direct contradiction of what he told me earlier. He was the only reason I gave this tool a shot in the first place. And then here he was pretending like, we had never had that conversation. But then he clarified. He said, I meant Copilot on VS Code. Okay. Now, can you guess which Copilot I was using? From my understanding, that was whatever is offered through Teams, because, Microsoft Teams has an integration with Copilot. So that's what I was using. And when I say whatever, it's because, I really don't know which one it is. Is it the same as accessing Copilot on the web? At least on my end, I wouldn't know because, our corporate firewall blocks that one. And Teams seems to be the only one that was approved, so that's why I used it. Anyway, what is Copilot? Like, really? It might sound like a silly question, but what is it? Is it just like a white-labeled ChatGPT? When I ask it directly on Copilot Web, it says it's Microsoft's AI companion powered by advanced models, including OpenAI's, but shaped by Microsoft's ecosystem, design philosophy, and capabilities. If ChatGPT is a powerful engine, Copilot is a full car built around it, with Microsoft dashboard, safety systems, and features. Okay, sure, whatever that is. But where did the name Copilot come from? That is my experience, at least. I think the first time I heard it was in the context of GitHub, the first AI code assistant that shipped with VS Code. Even though, they're both Microsoft products, they're two separate products. If you use GitHub Copilot, your data isn't siphoned back to your Microsoft account for now. What I was using in Teams is Copilot for Microsoft 365, which apparently is different from Microsoft Copilot for some reason. The 365 version lives inside Microsoft 365 apps, and that's Microsoft Office, new name for those who are not keeping up. The key difference is that the 365 version can work with your emails, documents, OneDrive, and so on. But if you have a Microsoft or a Windows device, you also have Windows Copilot, which is distinct from the one Microsoft 365 offers. So the Windows Copilot is your AI assistant inside the OS. It's meant to help you launch apps, summarize what's on your screen, and handle everyday tasks. In my experience, I couldn't get it to do any of those things, because apparently I don't have a Copilot Plus PC. That's also another version. Reading through the Microsoft Docs, I also found something called Copilot Chat. It's not quite a distinct product, but I'm not sure entirely how to classify it. Microsoft describes it as a general purpose reasoning tool for writing, brainstorming, and coding. You can find it in the Microsoft 365 apps, and it's also within GitHub Copilot. I really don't know what that means. But I think it's the part that explains the code and suggests fixes and helps with debugging. I asked Copilot Chat via GitHub Copilot to explain the difference between all these offerings, and it summarized it really neatly. It said, same family, different jobs. That's it. With all this, I'm only scratching the surface of what Copilot is or supposed to be, and I'm already tired. I didn't know what else to do at the job with all this confusion. Because at the end of the day, I felt inspired by a developer to explore it, only to find that he was touching just a small slice of this ecosystem. I still think, it's worth encouraging teammates to embrace a tool that everyone else is losing sleep over. And I should have stopped there, but I wanted to learn more. I wanted to learn more about his workflow. This is a 10x engineer, at least a so-called 10x engineer. I'm a developer after all, and whatever he is doing would be worth implementing with my team. So I asked him, what is your developer's workflow using Copilot? And I was not prepared for the answer he gave me. He said, actually, I made a mistake. I meant cursor. He wasn't talking about Copilot at all. Not the Teams one, not the GitHub one, or not any of them. He had used Copilot the same way we use Kleenex to just say any tissue paper, right? To him, any AI code assistant was just Copilot because, it was somehow tied to VS Code, so they're all Copilots. I had spent a whole sprint struggling through this tool, inspired by someone who couldn't have cared less about the Microsoft's ecosystem. I know there's a lesson there somewhere, I'm sure, but I just didn't learn anything from it. Microsoft spent billions acquiring GitHub and, integrated with OpenAI. They built an entire ecosystem of AI products and they named them all the same thing. So now Copilot just means AI assistant that helps you with code or write or whatever. It's not a product. It's not a category. It's like Kleenex, just means tissue, except Microsoft doesn't own the generic term. They just contributed to making it generic. So I'm going to try to find a lesson in this. And I think if I really push myself, I might say that, I spent 2 weeks automating Scrum ceremonies based on a misunderstanding. Microsoft has too many products with the same name, and my coworker doesn't pay attention to which tool he uses. I mean, rightfully so, because there's just so many different tools for developers. And at the end of the day, the workflow I created was useful. I automated some reports and emails, and, I did a whole lot of bureaucratic nonsense, and that actually helped. I guess Copilot can be used for that. But it had nothing to do with my coworker's recommendation. And it definitely wasn't the revolutionary coding assistant experience he was apparently having, because he wasn't even using my tool or the tool that I... Anyway, you get the point. So if someone tells you today that, oh yeah, they love Copilot, ask them which one. Actually ask them if they even mean, a Microsoft product. Because chances are they're just using it as a generic term. There was a point where everybody mistook Java and JavaScript. They just mixed those two names, but it didn't mean anything at all. And Microsoft, they wasted billions of dollars in their marketing, creating this very generic trademark. And if there's any lesson, maybe it's on their end. They need to pay attention to Copilot and maybe do something about the branding. All right, that's it for today. Thank you for listening, and I'll catch you on the next one.